this is beyond revolutionary. And once I came across this, I was like, wow, this is the ticket. This is, your essential permission slip to go into a different state of being, completely, completely.
Pull up a chair, set the world aside. Let's find the truth we keep trying to hide.
Welcome to Across the Table. I'm your host, James Finochio. And today with us, we have Kyle Trautmann with High Vibe Holonomics. I got it right.
We did.
Yeah, Kyle is our first guest from out of state. He's from the beautiful state of Minnesota. So, Kyle, would you like to tell us about what High Vibe Holonomics is?
Yeah, man. Well, first and foremost, the term high vibe holonomics is kind of a play on our former outfit known as High Vibe Healing, and that was a tongue-in-cheek kind of moniker, kind of taking our little like slight comedic stab at the new age kind of processes of frequency healing and all that stuff like that. We're a bunch of amateur comedians on this side of things, but yeah, High Vibe Holonomics was built on the principality of neuroscience, utilizing that as the causeway to change the structure of your effects, right? Of what's happening in your life. That could be healing, it could be performance, it could be anything that you're essentially desiring, like how to actually, quote unquote, manifest certain things in your life. But also using the principles of neuroscience for brain and heart coherence and kind of how that is. Really the forefront and the foundation outside of faith, of course, to help people essentially with a myriad of different issues. But our main practice is flow for post-traumatic growth with the precipice on holonomic brain theory, really teaching the essence of just really how we record and project and receive our reality essentially, and then also how that dictates our behavior to a certain degree, and then also how we just essentially change it. So yeah, we are a syndication built on kind of like an accountability structure within a institution called the Holonomic Institute. And yeah, man, it's a fun ride. It's a fun ride to be a part of.
Uh, how did you get involved in with this?
Yeah. Honestly, man, I never wanted to do it. Like, this was a calling, specifically to me. Uh, the big thing was just more so like my family was sick. My brother was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 9. And then he had kidney and pancreas issues due to that complications in his 20s. Actually had to get a double transplant when he was 25, 26, if I remember correctly. Um, yeah, it's just really kind of built off the backbone of my family just having health complications. And I was like, okay, well, if we can take a quote unquote holonomic approach, which just means the whole, in the essence of Greek law, um, what what do you have to do to essentially what do you essentially have to do to mirror your own family's complications, right? Like whether that is from genetics or anything like that. I just was really called to find solutions, outside of the traditional Western way, the allopathic model, and it was just really built off of a hunger to not be a part of that system. And it was just kind of birthed from the constant experiments that we were working on, in the basements of so many different practice sessions, and we just found a flow within the last 10 years that just really sits well with people. But yeah, everything was built off of escaping the traditional way of how people are treated in all facets when it comes down to health, especially for people who have chronic illnesses or people who have multiple illnesses. So that's really where it came from, was just being like, hey, how can I help my family, and then how can I also prevent any of that stuff happening to myself, and then obviously help people in the process too.
Right. I know my son was super excited. I didn't realize how much young people were were into this. I thought it was
Yeah,
mainly guys like
that's
me.
awesome.
But, uh, yeah, and the reason it interested me so much was because of, PTSD and generally the Western medical approach to it. I don't find it to be very helpful, which is
No,
generally
I mean,
everything you try.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the big thing that really catapulted me more so like in this practice was just working with my parents more so, and then my dad back in 2017 helping him get off specific glucocorticoid steroids, and that for me was just kind of that um, almost not needed permission slip to say that this stuff works if you stay consistent within those notions within the scientific laws, and also just natural laws, which really is just what can be documented, observed, and also changed and malleable over time. And then obviously just neuroplasticity has just given us this perfect window into what's possible. And you can do it, man. You can do anything without the intervention, obviously, of medications. You got to do it obviously appropriately to how a structure goes that, and obviously getting the proper help, and kind of the I would say the best way to say this is the best way to approach it, kind of comparatively, and also with even possible help of allopathic model. But there is multiple cases within our facilitation where we've helped people just get completely off of medications, and it's more than possible. More than possible.
So what is it? Is it something in the, neurotransmitters that you're getting at through this type of work?
I mean, to a certain degree, yes, there's a lot of signaling pathways. In energy literacy, what we teach within the actual confines in the master's program, there's 9 different circuits that actually help create voltage, charge within the cellular membrane, and also promote energy. I've really found it's not just necessarily neurotransmitters. It's not necessarily just hormones. It's not even necessarily just what you're consuming via diet, right? So it's a myriad of these 9 circuits that you can break down, but the more energy that you have within your cellular charge, it's just easier to actually do quote unquote inner work, or anything that is related to trauma. So we make sure that we're hitting all facets of just how energy is produced, how we actually harmonize it, and then also how we expand it as well. So it neurotransmitters are a part of it, but that's just one of the other 9 circuits for sure.
So what are the other how do these I guess you, help me understand it, like, what are these
For
other
sure.
circuits that, that work in conjunction with that?
Absolutely. So first off, you need to have ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is just the essential biological currency of just how everything is moving through our system. And then you can teeter it down into the bioenergetic foundation. That's kind of really the emotional soundtrack of your life. This is where you get into beliefs, your perceptions, the lenses of how you're seeing the world. Really, really key in on our forever framework, which we make sure that we're actually teaching people how to properly move through reality, because your brain is essentially a receiver. So obviously, if you have neural circuitry or a specific type of wiring due to signaling pathways that are due to trauma in the past or due to certain beliefs that you hold within the system, we want to make sure to take care of that. So those are the first 2 really right off the bat. And then you also, like you said, you have neurotransmitters. You also have your consumption of water, how that promotes electrical charge within the system, your breath, right? And then also moving into those things like hormones, moving those needles into that possibility of what is really important about the nutrition side of things, right? What are the mineral gradiencies? What is the electrical potential outside of just how your cells hold on to a charge, right? So the big 2 that we focus on is not only just how much ATP that you can garnish from what you're consuming, but then also what is the background, what is the precursor to the behavior specifically through your bioenergetic foundation. And then we get into the water, get into the breath work, specifically getting into the food, also the movement. And then you're also building that out with minerals, the neurotransmitters, like you said. And last but not least, you have the hormones. Like that to me has always just the way that I've seen how how cells hold charge, to me, that is always the least important when it comes down to building yourself back up, right? Especially if you are looking to build yourself out or rebuild yourself completely. That's the last thing that I really focus in on hormones. And we're in a really big marketplace for where a lot of people are looking at that first. That's like really ninth, and that's kind of like the totality of it. So those nine really build out a what we call a high charge being. And if you can hold the charge, obviously you can change on a more malleable component. But if you're obviously not holding a charge within your cellular component, it's very tough to go into your inner landscape, because this is where things like anxiety, depression, and all those things that you were talking about with neurotransmitters can be very depleted, right? So it's a fun approach. Obviously, when people come into our process, a lot of people don't jump into the master's program right away. We kind of ease them into this. But yeah, it's a fun thing, man, because once you understand how electrical voltage moves through your system, you can just geek out and just have a lot of fun with it. And then on top of it, the byproduct of that is essentially you're taking care of yourself, and everybody around that is going to benefit too. So yeah, that's how we kind of take it from 1 through 9.
It's fascinating to me because water being the component that we're made the most of,
Yeah,
in the way that electrical current carries through it, that would make sense why you need to stay hydrated, even for your brain health. That's
100%. Absolutely. And I think the only one that I did miss on was just the circadian alignment. Like, really, how do you move through life, not just in sleep, but also just the restorative notions of how you align during the times that you go to sleep. So I think that's the only one that I didn't mention, because that's extremely important too. But yeah, especially if you know properly how to rest, especially through the flow cycle. The fourth phase of the flow cycle is rest. So how we can teach appropriate and proper rest rather than just going to sleep and just hoping that works out for you by the time you go to bed, and then by the time you wake up. So for me, it's really about making sure that you have all those in conjunction, but they build on top of each other in kind of like that perfect sequence. And once you have that, I mean, like the notion of trauma and the things, these past experiences, memories, they just kind of ooze and fall off you. And it just makes getting into the operating system, i.e., your subcortical faculties, everything below your conscious awareness, just a lot easier to manage. And just also, it makes it a lot easier to work with, where it doesn't have to be this like arduous push on the system just to kind of do that inner scaffolding for yourself.
sense. That definitely makes sense. Now, when someone's coming to you, and they're trying to work through these things, what do you typically start with?
Yeah. So the number one is ATP. Like, we got to be able to get you into a place where you can hold a charge, right? So your cells can actually, so the membrane of the cells can actually be malleable to be able to hold on to a charge. Because if you're out here just taking a bunch of supplements, kind of going through that process, or if you go through, say, mineral testing or anything like that, and you're kind of doing that first, you're missing the fact that you're essentially pouring nutrients and enzymes and everything into your system, and your cells actually can't hold it. Right. So we want to make sure that you are actually consuming a vibrational diet. Right. It sounds a little like weird, but like that voltage component, like what is the key components, the cofactors for what you have to do. So I really like focus on the top four before we get into the latter five. And that really is making sure that you know how to breathe, right? You know how to structurally rest, and not just sleep, like I said. You know the bioenergetic components to your life. What are the core aspects to your belief system? What are the perceptual lenses? What associations do you still have attachments to, right? That just need to be properly severed and just reassigned. And then obviously making sure that you have proper ATP moving through the system, so everything else can kind of move in a very simple fashion. So always start with ATP, then really kind of go down the list from there. And then once you get into the water, stuff just gets really fun, man. Like, and especially for people like myself who just like to geek out and be like kind of like a lab chemist, it's really fun to see your body just rebuild itself when you just give it the proper associations, the proper ingredients, and also just really the proper, mechanisms to how the body can just be rebuilt. right? And it doesn't take a really long time, but it does take some hand holding at the beginning, but making sure you have proper enough ATP for your cells to hold that charge so you can do that deeper inner landscaping. And then just rest, man. Rest. It's the most underrated and undervalued thing I think that people are having a tough time with when it comes down to just disease in general, because there's a lot of cofactors to people not feeling well where they just can't rest, right? So when you can really get into that alignment with the ATP and then also just the inner work, you can start to see things open up relatively quickly.
Now, see, that's something that I'm just starting to learn some of this stuff
Awesome.
thanks to my wife. And what is it that you would say people need to understand the most about sleep and your sleep cycle and your circadian rhythm?
Yeah, it's just the misalignment, right? So when people, it's tough. It's really tough, man. Because when you're talking to people like myself who are entrepreneurs that work in different industries too, you do want to make sure that you do have enough ATP so you can fluctuate through different aspects of when you're going to sleep. I always tell myself, regardless of when I'm going to bed, like I always want to make sure that I have proper practices, non sleep, deep rest practices throughout the day. Obviously, we do that within our practice known as conscious integration, but staying consistent on when you wake up. Really, really tough for moms out there too, like no doubt. But it's really about making sure that you are aligned specifically on a consistency of sleep as best as you can, right? Some people argue go to bed at the same time, 60 minutes of screen time prior to, just cut it off, right? All dark rooms. Like we have an entire protocol called the holonomic harmonization program where it just tells you exactly step by step what to do to appropriate your rest. But like key rules is just go to bed at the same time as best as you can, right? Wake up consistently throughout your days at the same time, roughly ballpark, and just have that as non-negotiables, right? It's not gonna feel the greatest right away at the beginning, right? It's gonna kind of be like 3 to 5 days of somewhat pain and uncomfortability, but if you can grit through that, you're going to start to see your body acquiesce to being like, hey, like this is when I just am ready to go to sleep. And also, man, like the easiest hacks too, on top of this, is adding things that can ground you into that voltage as well. So sleeping on grounding sheets. Right. If you don't have a grounding mat on your bed, really being connected to the earth while you're sleeping too is massive. Right. And not only the fun amount of dreams you get to have when you're grounded throughout your rest too is amazing, but the principalities of making sure that you have that rest is also, don't be afraid to go into the mindfulness practices that you may come across throughout whoever you're learning from. Obviously, we go into deeper detail on that, but non-sleep deep rest has been proven to be 5 times more restorative than rest. So if you can rest while you're not actually sleeping, that's what we really focus in on that too. So just having a practice to really set yourself up, whether it's visualization, whether it is mental rehearsal specifically, or if it's just going through mental mapping, of just paying attention to your breath, like really having the simple hand holding techniques. But the big thing that I want to make sure people start with is just go to sleep at the same time, roughly around the same time, or wake up at the same time, regardless. Right, you can still have your life, but make sure that's a non-negotiable because your body will naturally acquiesce, and then everything starts to feel like you're getting plugged back in, essentially. And everybody can always tell when they haven't been fully rested, but then also you can do that throughout the day, kind of having these small little practices that we teach in our clearing schedules where people can really feel just rejuvenated while still being consciously awake.
That's wild. I have never heard of a grounding map or mat,
Yeah.
grounding mat. I didn't know they.
Grounding sheets, my man. Yeah, grounding mats. Like I'm on one right now while we're talking, but grounding sheets where you're just literally, it's silver threads. You're just literally plugged into the wall, grounded out to an outlet, and you're literally just, it's almost like mimicking sleeping on the earth. It's beautiful.
'Cause that is
Yeah.
wild the way your body connects when you're like, even when your feet are just touching the earth.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah,
Watch.
and this will always revert back to, how we break this stuff down for students and clients is just voltage. If you can plug in to a free electrical source, right? And just stay connected to that. And you're already resting. Imagine that double feedback that you're getting for your body while getting plugged in while you're sleeping too. So it's like you're getting two forms of rest simultaneously when you just implement simple things. And there's just a lot of studies, there's a lot of research that back that up. And yeah, man, it's beautiful. It's changed my life ever since I adopted one about 4 or 5 years ago.
My wife hasn't made me do that yet. She must be easing me into things.
Yeah, man. I mean, you gotta start somewhere, man. I mean, I'm very thankful for a lot of people that come in, and this is the reason why a lot of people who I've worked with, top performers, executives, and CEOs, they kind of have an understanding of what it means to, perform at a high level and be optimized within their own system. But like a lot of people do come in and they just need their hand holding, and there's just simple things that you can just add in, and it just drastically changes how they enjoy their life. And that's really what this is all about, is making sure people have the best experience possible.
Now, as far as the nutrients, it was interesting to me that I didn't realize that you can take um, all these supplements and so forth,
Hmm.
and but you're just pissing them out.
True.
There's
Yeah. Well, this is
because you can't hold it.
beautiful, man. I love that you're talking about this, because this is the reason why we focus on the charge first. Because if your cells don't hold the charge, you are essentially just eliminating everything, right? That you can't hold on to, right? So that's the reason why that ATP foundation is so important. So those nutrients, coenzymes, and cofactors to those nutrients have something to hold on to. And then your cells are like, perfect. I want to hold on to this, right? I just get chills talking about this because I get geeked out about it, because it's like a lot of people don't realize how simple that is. Like if you have a bunch of stimulants, or you're drinking a bunch of coffee, or you're drinking a bunch of alcohol or anything like that, you are literally lowering your voltage for nutrients to be assimilated and hold into the cell for them to be beneficial to your body. So it's really about appropriating your ATP production, and you can feel tangibly the difference when that happens. But until you have that charge, exactly what you're saying, you can take all the supplements in the world, but most of them you're just eliminating.
Could you tell the audience again? I know you said at the beginning what ATP was, but I'd like to reiterate that because it
Yeah.
seems to be a big deal.
Yeah, it is. I mean, honestly, for when it comes down to energy literacy and just understanding energy as a whole, whether it's biology or any other aspect, it is honestly, in my humble opinion, the most important thing. But it is adenosine triphosphate. So there's a portion of the Krebs cycles where that actually is split from adenoid diphosphate, which is just two molecular structures of phosphate. And that little combustion between those two is what actually gives us energy. So that beautiful process right there is, the more of that you have, the more it actually can combust. And it's literally almost like the analogy of like like starting your car. The more that you have, the better it performs, right? And the better you can hold that charge, and the more that it's appropriated, dude, the better you're gonna feel ultimately altogether. So it's like a not just a 1-2 system of being like, hey, we're doing inner work, or we're doing meditation or anything like that. We also want to make sure that we're properly fueling the system as a whole so it can perform, right? And that is just our biological currency that just moves voltage across our being.
That'll be would that be different for each person? As you know,
To a certain degree. So it would really kind of depend on, kind of, if like a person was coming in to work with me, it would really depend on what their intake is, like kind of what their history is. We kind of go through a specific amount of parameters just to kind of see what people are consuming, and like also at the same time like how they're breaking stuff down, and then also what is the precursor to a lot of ATP production, because a lot of your belief systems, a lot of hold up energy charges specifically from past experiences that haven't been resolved, those i.e. conflicts can have distortion specifically into the system and the fascial system as well. And that's obviously one of the other 9 circuits that we have, is the fascial, the movement. A lot of that gets tied up in our emotional landscape too. So it really depends on each person's background, and also how well they're taking care of themselves right now, and if they're on medications. Because medications, surgeries, traumas, especially blunt traumas, car accidents, concussions, things like that, those are known as circuit breakers. Having amalgams, having mercury fillings in your mouth, those are things that short circuit the electrical charge within your nervous system. So we want to make sure that we can kind of assess where each individual is at. But the universal like onboarding protocol to get people up to speed with what they really need to take that's beneficial for them. That's somewhat malleable just depending on where people are at, but it's very universal on how to get charges up to speed. And it's really understanding a lot of deeper aspects of how minerals move through the systems too. So you got to make sure that you have those in proper ratio so you're not depleting yourself as well. But it really just depends on where each person's at. But the platform and onboarding process is very similar to each person as they come through.
So I'm interested in these unresolved issues or traumas.
Yeah.
Um, how do you get to that? How do you?
So yeah. I mean, you have to slow the brainwave states down to get to an operating system. Obviously, my background is really more about the educational piece of guiding people to a first earliest imprint or a first memory sequence of where things have been charged. But this is also, I learned this a lot from just my drug history. My past as an addict for literally about a third of my life is that I was always just trying to slow down the operating system
Yeah.
just so I could get everything to just calm down so I could actually make sense of certain things. But that's like the biggest thing is we take people through a practice known as subconscious dynamics, which is flow for post-traumatic growth, teaching people each phase of the flow cycle to really allow them the opportunity to drop into their system without having to use external things, without having to take a supplement, without having to take a substance, without having to even look at a screen or anything like that. So our process, if you can slow down the brainwave state to get into the operating system, then we can start to canvas what the inner landscape is. So the nervous system can talk to you. And once the nervous system can talk to you, it's got its own language. And then once you can appropriate that proper language, you can bring up associated memories that have emotional conflict that have yet to be resolved. And once that happens, man, it's liberation through the system.
So do you achieve that through hypnosis?
No, so we get a lot of comparisons at times to hypnosis. Hypnosis is kind of dropping people immediately into a alpha state or even more so a theta state. Flow for post-traumatic growth is actually taking through each step of the brainwave state. So the first phase of flow is the struggle phase. So there's like a small window of time in that struggle phase where you have a part of the being that's trying to engage with a task or something that's happening, and then also a part of the being that's trying to avoid. So when we have to break through that little mold, that is your alpha brainwave state. And then once we get you to fully release into that second phase, which is the release phase, the surrender, then we're starting to get into more of the deeper aspects of where theta starts to operate. So beta right there at the top, right? Crack through that because there's different thresholds of beta. Once you get into alpha, you can start to get into a little bit more of the cognizance behind the practice. And then once you fully release, you'll feel your body disengage. You're in that deeper threshold of theta. And when you're in flow, man, you're in the pocket, right? And that's not hypnosis. That is essentially its own beautiful trance state, right? And once you're in there, then there's a lot of processes that can be essentially not rewired. I'm not a huge fan of that word, but can be reformatted because there is a beautiful practice or a beautiful notion and term in neuroscience called the window of reconsolidation, where there's a small amount of time where you can make memory associations malleable. And then you have a consolidation period afterwards, which is roughly about 6 to 8 hours where everything starts to integrate back into a new associative meaning. And that new associative meaning just gives you an opportunity to resolve whatever conflict that you have in an emotional attachment to. Because each experience that we have, or any imprint or any influence that we have in our life, we do have an association to it. And that's just all on brain theory. Not hypnosis. Teaching people flow is teaching them how to get through each phase before they get into rest. And it's a beautiful practice, man. It's something that's newly emerging into the field of neuroscience since 2022. Yeah, and we're the heads in that right now, so it's a fun time.
Great. And see, that's what I was talking to my sister because about this is that I think this has probably the greatest potential I've seen
Mm.
for addicts and PTSD, anything that I've seen. and I'm just starting to learn about it, but I see the potential for this, and that's great what you're working on. So,
Well, it's powerful, and sorry to cut
that's
you off.
okay.
'Cause I just not only based off of like my history, but there's a lot of studies in like the mid to late 90s that says most addicts that have substance abuse disorder or some form of that issue, they're really just looking for flow state. They're looking for a coherence peak in their consciousness so they don't have to revert to anything outside of themselves. And when I came across that, I was like, this is beyond revolutionary. Like anybody that can now, can you come in and work with somebody on a one-to-one basis on a consistent basis so you can master the skill of doing it for yourself, right? And for me, I think that is the greatest possibility that we have in the near future of helping people with a ridiculous amount of maladies when it comes down to substance abuse and any type of substance use disorder. So yeah, and that's where I got my passion from, and once I came across this, I was like, "Wow, this is the ticket." This is, your your essential, permission slip to go into, a different state of being, completely, completely.
Then it doesn't wear off.
Well, that's the one thing. It's a practice, right? So the flow cycle is one of the three universal cycles of consciousness. We have our circadian cycle, we have our ultradian cycle, which is just kind of like how our energy moves and dips throughout the day, and then you have your flow cycle, which is just your attention cycle. How well can you be attentive, right? So it's wild because we, just as Americans, the earliest study says that we have an average between 4 to 6 seconds of attention span, and I can only imagine just with the advent of everything in the last 10 years, it's probably shorter than that. But it does take on average 23 minutes to even get back into an engagement of attention with just one task. So it is something that you do have to teach. And it's not that the process of the craving or the desire or almost kind of like the lustfulness for the substance wears off. It's just the practice to want to liberate yourself is really what you get to master. And once you get into it and you have fun with it, man, I can just say the testament from all the people that I work with plus myself. It's one of the most freeing experiences knowing that you have the ability with your awareness to just drop in at any given time if you so choose. But the hard part is you have to take the time to do it. You have to do it consistently. And the caveat to the challenge is that it's so easier to go do a substance, right? Especially when your nervous system is wired to said substance. Uh, and anybody out there that's had those type of issues like myself, it's very challenging, right? But that process of practicing, really getting into the flow cycle, knowing those phases of where you're at and how to feel through that process, it's your own medicine cabinet for yourself.
See, that's the thing too, is being an addict myself was that you you always seem to take and replace one addiction with another addiction.
Yeah, sure.
So where does that come from? Is that still just trying to find your flow state?
I think it's a myriad of things. I think there is, due to the portion of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which is secreting the amount of dopamine from each task that you're going through. I feel like there is a depletion of dopamine. Obviously, this is where you can get into the nutrient gradiencies and the mineral composition within, the nine circuits. But I think that switch up is, so for instance, like if you have an issue with alcohol and then obviously that goes away, right? The actual act of consuming or consumption goes away, and then you become a workaholic, right? It's really about how the nervous system is appropriating itself to the dopamine deficiency, but then also at the same time, what is underneath the actual vice itself, right? And then this is where you get into the inner landscape, because you got to start to see like what are you telling yourself? What are the narratives? What are the attachments? What are the associations from everything that you've learned in this world? And how is that curating your experience, right? So I think when people find something to replace, their past addictions, now it's the association and the identification specifically to what they're doing. But there's always that connective piece. Essentially, as a former addict myself, it's really just about, are you connected to something, right? Are you driven by something, right? Instead of a substance, right? So I think replacing one thing, I'm not saying it's outdated news. It's just when you take away, what is essentially the band-aid, you have an opportunity to look at the inner components of yourself, and also just obviously the inner experiences and the associations that you've accumulated over time. And then instead of doing that, people just revert to the next thing because they have a hard time, or they just don't initially take that initiation for themselves to see what that is. But I have seen a ridiculous amount of people who have fully recovered that don't even identify as an addict anymore. And that to me is the key piece of what's in the core of the being, because obviously, as you identify, the reality is going to receive your identity as you are, because that's who what you're saying you are. So I see the dopamine deficiency, right? This is where I think a lot of people, and to all certain degrees, a lot of people don't realize like our main infliction is just constantly what's in front of us, right? And usually that's a cell phone. So everybody has their own way of being addicted to certain devices and substances as well. When it comes down to the dopamine deficiency, I think that's where people are constantly looking to secrete more of that so they feel connected to something. And dopamine is a massive driver for just connecting to anything. So I think that's a very important part. So when you kind of take care of those two, really take care of the driver, right? And then also at the same time, the identity, things shift massively, massively.
Now, two, I also know that in the neurotransmitters, you also have serotonin, which
Hmm.
is what these SSRIs are supposed to be, I don't know, boosting or regulating serotonin. How does
Yeah.
serotonin play into this flow state?
Oh, dude, so what's beautiful is there's different components to what I love about the struggle phase is that there's different concoctions, and we break this down really, really well in our curriculum. There's different chemical constituents from each phase of the flow cycle. So you have a lot of cortisol and noradrenaline literally up front because it kind of feels like it's tension building. And then that serotonin and kind of like a more oxytocin release from the dopamine really comes in because you are coming into a connective piece and a real calming, kind of almost like a mood boost when you're releasing that tension. Because if you've ever felt it, this is very universal too. If you've ever dropped in and kind of felt your shoulders drop, that serotonin uptake really just builds up your mood. But a lot of people are task switching so much throughout the day that they can never genuinely feel that, right? And then this is where the serotonin is just essentially just dropping that marker specifically of those key indicators when it comes down to cortisol and noradrenaline, so you can actually feel a sense of relief. That's where serotonin really comes in. And then obviously the binding and connective components with like oxytocin, you get anandamide, right? You get a nice flush when it comes down to flow. But serotonin is really key in the component of the release phase, the surrender phase, because once you feel that sense of relief, there's an uptick in serotonin, right? So a lot of people that are taking just SSRIs and just in general or anxiety medications, they're constantly looking for that struggle phase, that engagement phase, to just short circuit so they can easily drop into the nervous system. And that's where serotonin really comes in. Because once you learn how to surrender, you're kind of just one with your present, right? You're kind of one with where you're at and you're calm with it. So, yeah.
So, yeah. Now, how does what is it? Neoepinephrine? Um, yeah, yeah, norepinephrine.
Yeah.
Well, how does that? I'm unsure how that plays into things.
Yeah, so that really is it's the binding component between the nerve cells. So that really is kind of up front, right? So when we talk about that notion of the fight or flight or that struggle phase, that kind of component coming into play is really about, hey, we're creating some form of action within the brain and body. So those components, when you're really starting to engage in a task, is where you are essentially mobilizing these kind of stress cocktails, these neurotransmitters that are going to start to sharpen your intention so you can actually engage. And that's really the key component of that. And that's where, obviously getting into, even reverting back to the 9 circuits, is when you have appropriated ATP, there's less mobilization specifically of those neurotransmitters. So it's actually easier to engage into any task that you're doing. Because if you have a low threshold of ATP, you're really more prone to anxiety. It's really hard to focus. You really feel rigid within your body. Things feel tight. But norepinephrine, that notion is a crucial aspect of really mobilizing your brain into a form of action. And for me, a form of action, especially when your brain's getting involved, is how well you can focus.
Oh, we're talking about like screen time, um, oh, things like that are throwing the body off. Like especially nowadays with all these devices and TVs. Can you explain how that throws your cycle out, or how that works exactly within your body?
Absolutely, man. So even going back to screen time, like you said, blue screens, right? Even my glasses right now have like a appropriated filter for all the screens and the lights that I have, specifically that are just shining down even from my headlight and also just my computer, because it is just squirting out a ridiculous amount of dopamine. And that dopamine is just really hinging you on your hedonic adaptation. Your hedonic adaptation is essentially how your biochemistry is attributed to your habits. Right. So when you have that type of constant dopamine drip, dopamine drip, it's literally like creating, a withdrawal component. Right. So it's like if you feel the lack of dopamine because you're not connected to a driving force, you're going to revert to the easiest access point. And that's really what screens do. They literally centralize. And it's almost, I wouldn't say putting the nervous system on fire, but it's putting the nervous system on notice to prepare itself, right? And to prepare itself for what exactly? And this is going back into the noradrenaline and the norepinephrine notion, where it's trying to create a sense of safety in the nervous system. Like that's really what it's trying to do, to prepare itself so it can literally, defend itself. Like, and that's when you start to get into how the cells really communicate on how to prepare for what is quote unquote fight or flight. So the constant notion of being in blue light, being in screens, is just sequestering more and more dopamine. So you just feel that you are being driven towards something rather than being prepared to relax or being prepared to rest or appropriating rest for what your system needs at different times. So yeah, screens, ever since they came about, man, they are the biggest thing to keep people hooked. Like, I think that's what people are most addicted to more than anything. Not just dopamine itself, but the easiest form to get to dopamine, which are screens, and more so your cell phone.
Right. Now,
Yeah,
for some reason, I feel like social media plays a similar role in how we feel.
absolutely. Yeah. 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 You want to talk about confirmation bias that comes from social media. This is not rocket science anymore. It's like you think about something, and all of a sudden, within the span of a certain amount of time, that same thing that you're thinking about shows up on your phone somehow,
Yeah.
right? It's because the phone is tracking the dilation specifically of your eyes and what you're paying most attention to. Because what you're paying most attention to is driving more dopamine for you to be connected to it. And there's just trackers in these systems of database from all these major tech companies that are literally paying attention to that so they can market something to you for you to consume it.
Hmm.
Right. And that's just really that's the attention economy in a nutshell. And unfortunately people get stuck in the doom scrolling, and they're in the pit of despair when it just keeps coming down and constantly. And then obviously you have the division aspects of different systems that just are purporting and just dividing your perceptual lens every time you look at things. Yeah, and then obviously any major, history or historical event or anything that's happening on this 3D landscape is going to be heavily distorted with people's opinions. And then obviously whatever you're most paying attention to is going to keep growing.
And
And major tech companies know that.
this is how we end up in our echo chamber because we
Totally.
desire
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I feel like from there, we definitely have to talk about identity and ego, how they play a part in how we get played through
Totally.
commercials and psyops and our phones and social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for people to pay attention to is not only just their programming, but really how they're identifying with said programming. So when you're really in a place of consciousness, of full, constituted awareness, you're starting to realize that you're being pulled in different places. Really, that's just the law of consciousness in a nutshell, which just says whatever's imprinted on the being paired with a feeling now starts to become your reality. Right. So when you start to look at that, you're realizing I was like, oh, well, if I grew up feeling some way about something, whether it was a race, a political party, or anything like that, a financial system or a type of a financial system, I'm going to be more appropriated to lean towards that as I grow older because there's more repetitions that are ingraining those neural pathways. And then you have confirmation bias every time you go out there and look. And now, if you have anything that's really heated or a sensitive topic, they're gonna shove, and I say they, like I know who they are, but the formulations of how people are distorted based off their identity is they are going to constantly look out into the world to reaffirm their identity. And everything that is in their identity is constantly going to be projected out into the world because the brain has one major role. It's to receive whatever information is already constituted in its neural networks, right? And this is Carl Jung called these complexes, right? How are we associating with certain things outside of ourselves throughout our entire life? So if you talk to just I would say average Joe or average Susan or whatever, and just ask them what their belief is specifically on, say, just politics, right? Every single emotional landscape that they have based on that belief is going to be reaffirmed in everything that they see. And then they are going to fight tooth and nail for something that they don't understand just because that's confirmation bias based off their identity, right? So I always tell people when it comes down to healing, desire, changing of any sort, if you can relinquish the identities that have gotten you entrapped in the first place, that's like the first step right there. But you're right. It's really how do you distort consciousness as a whole to add in the entropy. Entropy is just adding in more chaos into the system so you're easily controlled, right? Everything is really a control grid.
Yeah, I found that fascinating that our identity, how much that if it's being reaffirmed to us that
Hmm.
let's say let's just use politics because it's the easiest one at this point in time because we see how divided everyone is and we're cut up into these tribes. And I don't think that most people understand how easily our minds are manipulated because well, I just heard this the other day that our brains, our lower brain, our mammalian brain, the one that controls so many things, doesn't understand language. So you don't reason with your brain. It doesn't.
Mm.
Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I love what you're saying here because I can kind of like add in some context of what we do. We teach the four levels of awareness within our curriculum, and it just talks about what is conscious, which is documented algorithmically and mathematically by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is also known as the grandfather and the godfather of flow. And he found that 0.006% of our entire awareness is conscious. That means 99.994% of everything else is subcortical, right? So, and there's also a slight distinction and some synonyms to the notion of subconscious and unconscious, right? But irregardless, it's all below our conscious threshold. And all of those purported images, feelings, sensory experiences through our senses don't have that reason basis because that's based off the conscious faculty. So, what is so, like you said, talking about easily manipulated, people are also persuaded by their own manipulation. And then they manipulate themselves based off of what we were talking about with confirmation bias because your brain loves images. and it loves associations. And whatever image it has, i.e., a depiction, right? We call it a 3D holonomic or like hologram, right? Essentially, through the process of what we teach, you have an association to that hologram unless it's cleared through your neural pathways. And until you do that, it's constantly going to be how you walk through this world. It's just going to be as it is because that's what's held within your system. And I love this notion, and this book by Bessel van der Kolk doesn't like hit the mark completely. It's the body keeps the score. But I had to add to that, the body projects the score as well. Right. So that's why people are constantly out here projecting on the manipulations that they see. And this is the reason why the mass media and like you were saying, the psyops are so easily, the most emotionally contagious thing, where people get so wrapped up in the truth telling and all this other stuff where they forget that they are being literally exposed from their own manipulations based off their own confirmation bias, and that is all built on how they identify. So you're spot on, man, because the images and depictions that we see and the associated emotions that we give it really start to create who we are, essentially, and who we are is really how we move through this world.
How is it that you get at what's your system for getting at these the like the struggles that you were talking
Yeah,
about? How did
yeah.
like I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to ask here. Is like what how did you figure out how to get to those particular ideas that we formed um, with certain other aspects of life or
Yeah.
unresolved hurt? Like, how do you get at that?
Dude, what a great question. Because I mean, now that you think of like, however, like I'm 35, so I'm like, you got 35 years on this earth accumulated of experiences. Each of those experiences have some form of emotional association to it. And the lower densities, right? We call them two densities, the things like anger, sadness, grief, sorrow, apathy, right? Things of that nature, those are always embedded into the circuitry as a whole. Now, if we teach non-sleep deep rest, our form, we call it the power five. If we teach that appropriately, we can get into the operating system where we can actually talk to the nervous system so it can alleviate himself. Because what's really fascinating, this is where, I lose some people outside of neuroscience because this is where spirit gets involved. Your natural being is just flow. Like if spirit wasn't flowing through you, you would not have a sense of being because there is something of a higher gradients, a higher potential, right, of a higher intelligence that's operating all the things that you fundamentally can't think of, right? So now imagine dumping so many experiences with such latency of awful emotions on top of an individual. What is going to happen other than that person's going to start to short circuit, right? So if we can teach them to utilize their focus to get into that operating system, the operating system can literally tell us what we need to relieve it. And then we can reassign through the window of reconsolidation a new meaning to that experience. So that experience is no longer painful. Now that wisdom, that lesson that you get from that trauma, right, or that experience now has a completely different meaning to the nervous system. So the nervous system can go back to what it always is trying to do, which is just heal you. It's literally trying to just strive for wholeness all the time. We're the only things within our subjective experiences, i.e., how we add in our emotional components to what we experience. That's the only thing that gets in the way of us just naturally being, right? So we have a set questions and kind of assessments of just seeing where we have to go, right? And then we just give proper instructions on how to do the conscious integrations to really get involved with your operating system so your operating system can do the work for you. Because you can tap into the pharmacy that is your being. Like it's so much fun. But yeah, it does take a little practice, but we just have a couple assessments just to see where the identity markers are and then also what you're holding within the system. Ask the system appropriate questions, go through a flow sequence, which we call subconscious dynamics, and then we just reassociate the meanings to what you're doing and then also what you want to bring into the world as well. So it's really about asking the proper questions. I always believe that your life is in direct reflection of the greatness of your questions. So if we can ask your nervous system the appropriate questions to the context for your brain to reassign a meaning, everything starts to shift, like almost immediately too. And that's the power.
Now I think about, because I recently just started praying again. What
Beautiful, man. I love it.
I had an experience yesterday that was pretty wild. Um, because when I was younger, when I used to pray, I used to feel like I'd always say this, I feel like I'm praying to the top of my head. And
Okay.
uh, yesterday was definitely a different experience than that.
Hmm.
So how do you feel like prayer and works into flow?
Dude, I love it. Well, I mean, if you think about this too, like in the essence of who we are, which I firmly believe based off of just the countless amount of people that I've worked with and also just the sessions where you have to sit one to one with people, is that we are natural in that essence of flow. I firmly believe this. If we just take ourselves out of the equation, that is literally all we need to do. And our accumulation of those experiences of who we think we are is the only thing that gets in the way of what we desire, what we want, how we feel. And by praying, you're literally objectifying your subjective self. Like you're literally giving over the lower density of your quote unquote perceived problems to a higher source to be reorchestrated into a tapestry, which is also known as the 0 point field or the quantum field. This is where physics come in. And then you get to tap into that effervescence of just beautiful ether that you can just literally go to all the time. And I just get chills every time I talk about this because I pray 3 times a day because it's the easiest way for me to get back into what makes me helpful for other people too. So it's like when you don't understand the process of prayers because you're trying to make it think in the confirmation bias of how you think it's supposed to go,
Right.
right? All you have to do is just let it out, man. And the best way is to, I always tell people there's no right or wrongness to life. There just is. You appropriate yourself to what is, right? And then the brain, which doesn't actually fundamentally, if you look at it from a neuroscience standpoint, doesn't care about good, bad, right, or wrong. It just cares about what it's receiving. So if you let go of the things that you're holding on to, it can receive differently. And that inner guidance that's coming from that higher source, that divine insight or intelligence that you get, that's where people really get motivated to do amazing things. So I love that you're saying that, man, because I had that was one of my lockups when I was just, getting out of my substance issues back. What was this, like 8 years ago, where I was just like, I don't even know how to pray anymore. Like, I just didn't know what to do. I was kind of looking for a permission slip for somebody to tell me how to do it. And then somebody was just simply start with the Lord's Prayer. And I was like, okay, I'll start there. And then I'll start formulating what works in resonance to what I need. And all I need is gratitude because that is the ultimate state of receiving. So I was like, I'm just giving gratitude for this gratitude for this hug, gratitude for this coffee, gratitude for this conversation, because you receive in direct proportion of how you are grateful for life. So that's, excuse me, how I started praying. It's just being thankful, just being grateful to even breathe, right? To just be alive in that moment. And then how do I constitute that and pay attention to the feedback literally that I see when I move through space? And space is just 3D existence, right? So and that's what I love about, hearing people's like journeys into prayer, into faith, or into spirit, whatever that means to them. It just means that they are connecting to something that is not identified with the lower densities of all the past traumas that they have.
That's it. How did I hear it put? Well, the Lord's Prayer, I think, is a good where it says, "Not that my will should be done, but that your will should."
Yeah,
In order, like
exactly.
putting the ego and identity out of it, and succumbing to, well, not even succumbing to, just allowing yourself to feel the energy
Totally.
around you and
Yeah.
in what the universe has given you. It's
Dude,
kind
it's beautiful. Yo, it is so beautiful because like there's a part of our practice in subconscious dynamics, one of the techniques that literally is called it's really the process of giving over the lower densities to a higher association, a higher intelligence. And in holonomic brain theory, there is a lot of notions to that about black holes because of the gravitational pull. So we use a lot of imagery to utilize black holes for people to just give away their lower densities to this black hole that is sitting above them so they can essentially release and give away to thy will, being like, hey, this black hole's will is more gravitational, it's more supercharged and can pull anything that I can ever hold on to. Let's just give it over. So you're teaching people how to surrender, right? And it's literally called quantum forgiveness, right? What are you giving over that you don't need in this moment anymore, especially when you're in a state of ease? You're in a state of parasympathetic dominance. You're in a state of safety where you can just let it all pour off you. Right. And that's the best part about just even equating that to neuroscience. I was having a great conversation with my manager yesterday about the precursor even to biblical things is neuroscience in its notion. Right. So when you're talking about thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, I was like, okay, well, then give your lower densities to the heavens so you can walk heavenly in this earth. Like it's so poetically beautiful, and I get into the nitty gritty of the beautiful stuff about that. But like that's how simple it can be. That just the hardest part about us as humans is being consistent with it and taking the time to do it, right? Not being pulled in different ways that makes it not a priority.
Now, do you find having consistent prayer helps you more?
Dude,
Do you do it
massive.
like on an
Honestly,
exact routine pretty much every day?
I would love to. I know for a fact I do it as soon as I get up in the morning and right before I go to sleep. The third time or the second, essentially technically time throughout the day is really kind of like when I need it. It's not like directed at like 12 noon or anything. If I was militant like that, I don't know if I'd be an interesting person.
Right.
Um, but I think the second time throughout the day is really if I have like too much on my being. Right. There can be a lot for a nervous system, especially for people out there who are caregivers, right? People who are moms, people who work in any type of healing art or in type of facilitation, or are in any type of therapy, like they facilitate a therapy. That can be a lot that's put on them. So it's like that's a great time to utilize that. And we use forms of our level 1 clearings within our curriculum as portions of prayer too. So it's like I am very consistent on 3 times minimum, but there's been many a days where I've had really challenges, right? I don't have really problems. We're the only species that thinks we have problems. We have challenges. And I just find them as puzzles. But if I have more puzzles than I do the capacity energetically, I just pray more, man. Like because it's so easy to tap into that source because that's the source giving me life. So why would I try to go outside and create more chaos for my own perceived problem if I can just go within and just being like, oh, well, correspondence says if I go within, as without is more peaceful. So I got to start here. So I've been many days where I've just been like, yo, like 12, 15 times a day. Like it's, especially when you're in traffic and you're about to lose your lid over somebody that like, cut you off or anything. You're like, all right, cool. Like I'm not going to flick you off or anything. So that's it.
Really
Yeah.
hard to do sometimes.
So hard, man. I slip up still. I know we all do. So
Yeah. And um wow, there's so much more for us to talk about here. And I know we before we did the podcast here, you and I talked about breaking this down into 3 segments because it's a lot. Plus, like Katie and I were talking about was that, by the time I go back and look at this, I'm going to be like, man, I wish I'd have asked this. Man, I wish I'd have asked that. And so I think it's time to really think about it and mull it over and come back, and because there's so much more to go into here because it's such a fascinating topic.
And it's a lot, and I'm so thankful, obviously, to work with Katie back in 2022, because it's like as things get so fresh and emerge, it does take like usually about anywhere from 3 to 5 years for like real fresh methods behind neuroscience to actually take a foothold. And it does take usually about on average 30 years for paradigms to shift when it comes down to observational science. So we're right on that cusp because like the 2000s were so massive when it came down to consciousness as a whole. The 2010s was really a decade dedicated to the brains. 20s came with its own uniqueness about sovereignty and the individual of how to, be profound within your faith. And I think right now we're in that perfect pocket where people are going to drastically shift their awareness and just their consciousness as a whole within the next like 10 years. So yeah, man, I'm excited to break it all down because it's helped a lot of people, and I'm really excited to get into the nitty gritty of how this can help more people.
So, Kyle, where can anyone who's interested in perhaps working with you, seeing what you do, where can they find you?
Yeah, simple place is just the website, just so you can get some context of what we do, and that's www.highvibeholonomics.com. But reach out to Kyle Anthony Trautmann on Facebook. Just send me a DM. I'm super, 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 super quick on that to get back to people. That's the best way is just go to the horse's mouth. So I can get you plugged into our team, possibly into one of our free open houses. So you can kind of get the backstory and the back mechanics of how everything works. We do that once or twice a month. And that's free for people to come check out what we do, ask questions, obviously, through that process too. But yeah, those are the simple ways to get a hold of me.
Thank you very much for coming on with me, Kyle. And I look forward to our next two.
Yeah, dude, I'm
See,
excited.
Kyle,
Thanks, man.
I
I
love the
appreciate it.
work that you're doing, man. I appreciate
Thank you. Likewise,
Right,
dude.
brother. Thank you.
Yep.
Peace out, people. My team and I know how valuable your time is, so we wanted to thank you for making Across the Table part of your day. By liking, sharing, and subscribing, you help keep us inspired and motivated to continue creating content for all of our listeners. If you have ideas for the show or would like to be a guest, please contact me via email at james@acrossthetablepodcast.com. That's james@acrossthetablepodcast.com. Thank you.
Pull up a chair, set the world aside. Let's find the truth.